Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on a subject that is very dear to my heart, which is the confusion that can be created between desire and divine love, or desire and love, and especially in the context of spirituality and spiritual practices. So it's a bit of a difficult subject. It's not very straightforward. There's not one truth. The only thing I can do is share my perspective on this because it's something that I encounter very often in my women's circles, in the Magdalene work. The confusion that exists between a desire that we feel, a physical desire, a sexual desire, a physical pull towards someone, and a real connection, real love. And the same can exist in a spiritual context, especially in a day and age where there are so many different tantra classes and practices, and even many spiritual teachers are not very straightforward on this, do not have very clear boundaries, or are not very clear with their intentions. We all have examples of spiritual gurus in the last couple of years who have been outed for being sexual predators. So we'll look a little bit into why that is, and what creates this kind of environment, what the responsibility is of the students, of the clients, of the spiritual seekers, what the responsibility is of the spiritual teacher, of the person holding space for other people, which is a greater part of responsibility. But also, how come there is this much confusion between these different concepts, these different things? To be very clear, for me, a person cannot go into sexual spiritual practices like sexual tantra or work with a partner if beforehand this person has not established their own connection to source, their own connection to the divine. If this is not very clear, if the faith of this person has not yet been established, doesn't have a strong base, a strong root, a strong grounding, if this person is not aligned within him or herself, then please do not start mixing your energy with another person in your spiritual practices or multiple people, because what it will create is spiritual, energetic chaos and dispersion. And this is what I see so often. So it's also why I felt called to make this video. So where does this energy of desire come from? I believe it's every person's, every human being's deepest desire to merge with the divine, to have a living, breathing, physical, spiritual, emotional, conscious connection with the divine. This is what we are all looking for. We are thirsting for the transcendental. We are craving divine experiences, sublime experiences. This is what our whole being, our body, our spirit, our soul feels pulled by, feels drawn towards. The transcendent, the divine, the beautiful, the sublime. We're always in quest to look for the divine. If then we don't direct this desire for merging, for fusion, for the transcendental with a spiritual path, with a quest directed towards the divine and our personal connection to the divine, our inner sense of lack and our inner sense of incompleteness, unwholeness, will make us look for fulfillment on the outside via external sources. Now, there are many external sources that can give us very briefly the sensation that we are in a movement of elevation, that we are maybe touching upon an aspect, an element of the sublime. There's, of course, there's drugs, there's alcohol, substances that momentarily create this space for us, momentarily make us touch upon a more expanded state of being. Of course, with these substances, there's always the backlash afterwards. It can be behavior, a search of adrenaline, a search for instantaneous satisfaction, compulsory buying. This is, of course, why this behavior is so prevalent in our world today as well. It is because it fuels our consumer society. It is played upon, like many people who are trying to sell their products intentionally create a sensation of unwholeness and sensation of lack, because if there is lack, there can be something offered that will create the illusion of temporary fulfillment. And the most direct source of fulfilling this inner sense of lack is by looking for energy, looking for what it is that we feel that we're lacking, which in essence is a connection to the divine, through another person and in another person. So the most attractive energy, the most attractive thing to another human being is a human being that is in connection with Source, that is touched by divine grace, that has an element, an aspect of divine light that maybe we think we cannot reach, that we cannot access by ourselves. So automatically, if someone emits a light or a stronger frequency of light than us, we will automatically feel drawn towards that person. If we are conscious of this dynamic and we know why we feel attracted by this person, we can then be inspired by the presence of this divine essence in the other person and help this energy to stimulate our own growth and our own path and give direction to our spiritual seeking, our spiritual quest. If we are not conscious of what is happening, then we will try to get closer to this person and we will start to try to tap into this person's energy, this person's source, and basically try to take some of their essence to fill our inner cup. We will nourish ourselves from their wellspring instead of cultivating our own inner wellspring. And so basically, this is a behavior of predators. Many of us, most of us in today's world, are in a situation of either being preyed upon or being a predator to other people, or both. Very often, it's both. Because we're so used to this. We're so used to this dynamic of constant the search of constant gratification and satisfaction, this inner sense of lack, of not feeling whole, of not being complete, of not being there yet, not knowing how to satisfy ourselves, and so looking for this in another person. And other people do this with us as well. So it's really a vicious cycle, and the only way we can break this is by becoming conscious and really directing our gaze upwards. Now, the reason why this is so confusing as well is because once we enter into a living, breathing relationship with the divine, it is very much like a love relationship. We fall in love with the divine. We fall in love with God, Goddess, Source. It makes us be in this exalted state, in this state we're in where when we fall in love, we're more open, we blossom, we open ourselves. And there is a sense of desire stirred within us. There are examples of this mostly in mystical currents of spiritual practices or religious practices. A very clear example is Sufi mysticism and Sufi poetry, where very clearly in the texts there's talk about the beloved, and clearly it's a love relationship. The spiritual seeker becomes drunk with the essence of the divine and has the experience of being in love with the sublime, with the divine. We can find a remnant of this in today's Catholic Church, for example, where nuns are basically married to Jesus, married to the church. They become the bride of the church. And this is a remnant of ancient practices of hieros gamos, of the divine union between the masculine and the feminine, where it was much less a relationship of servitude and of sacrifice, but very much a relationship of divine union, of divine support, and the energy of love and desire for the divine, cultivated in a spiritual purpose, with a spiritual purpose. The problem also, when we look for the light and this connection to source through other people, is that we can never be entirely satisfied. What we take from another person will always only be a temporary source of nourishment. We will deplete this source of nourishment, which means that over time our sense of emptiness will increase. We will become more and more hungry. We will be more and more in need of external nourishment to keep our energy at the same level. So, this is what happens when we meet someone who carries a lot of divine grace, a lot of divine light. A sense of desire is stirred within us. But this desire that is stirred within us has the purpose of making us curious about the divine and of directing our gaze towards the divine. It has the purpose of opening us, allowing us to blossom like a flower, like a rose, to be able to receive more divine essence ourselves via a direct connection to source. And so for spiritual teachers or people holding space in a spiritual, in a religious, in a conscious context for other people, this is something to be conscious about as well. If you are getting a lot of attention from males, females around you, students, then these people who express feeling attracted to you are actually not attracted to you physically or you as a person. What they are drawn to is the divine essence that they perceive within you. And this is what they are craving in essence. This is what they want to access. This is why these people feel drawn to you. So don't take it personally and be very vigilant to put up the right boundaries if you're doing this kind of work. And working a lot with the energy of Mary Magdalene myself and the story of Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, I am convinced today that this is something that they had to deal with on a daily basis and that they often encountered. They were very charismatic people. They were clearly vessels of divine light. They would have had an enormous pull and an enormous attraction on many people with a purpose as well. Their purpose was to emanate this light, to be these radiant sources of divine light, of connection to God, and inspire other people through this. But I'm sure that it created also a lot of confusion in many of the people who encountered them. And because of the social structure of the time that was already very patriarchal, and the religious structure at the time, which was all already structured around guilt and sacrifice, I'm sure that this, in many people who felt physical desire or sexual desire towards Yeshua and Mary Magdalene, a lot of them felt guilty about it. But because both of them had to have been conscious of this and had to have felt these kinds of energies surrounding them, I'm sure that because they put up very sane boundaries and they were very clear about this, they were then able to help these people alchemize this energy and transform it into a desire to cultivate their connection to the divine. And ultimately, it became a motor, a very powerful, energetic push for their own spiritual expansion and growth. I'm also conscious that this couldn't have been the case for 100% of the people surrounding them. And I think one very clear example of this is Peter. Very clearly in the words that he uses and his behavior, the position he takes towards Mary Magdalene, there's a very strong energy of resentment within him, resentment towards Mary Magdalene personally, and I think towards the feminine in a larger sense. Mary Magdalene broke many, if not all, of the codes of what a woman was supposed to be like at the time. She as well must have been incredibly charismatic, emanating this beautiful source light, being very sure and certain of herself, being a highly educated woman, very grounded, rooted, aligned in her rock steady, strong faith. It must have been very unusual for many of the men at that time to encounter such a woman. And I'm sure that within many of them, it stirred a desire to get closer to her, a physical desire, a sexual desire. And because some of these men, and I think Peter is a perfect example of this, considered themselves to be holy men, to be above physical desire, to be above the physical sensations of this world. He probably resented her for stirring these feelings in him. Now, of course, she would have been the perfect vessel and the perfect person to help him evolve on his spiritual path had he let her in, had he allowed her to communicate about these things and to learn from her. So this kind of dynamic, this kind of energy is not something that is new. It is not something that has just popped up recently. It is something that has existed in all day and age. Of course, today it is amplified because we're in such a visual culture. We have social media, we have Instagram, we have video, we have YouTube, we have all these different channels, and a lot of people are using their sexuality to attract attention, to attract viewers, to attract potential clients, and transform this amount of energy that they're receiving or the amount of attention that they're receiving in a monetary gratification. Of course, if you truly have a spiritual calling, this is something that you have to be very vigilant about and that you have to be very conscious about. If you're a spiritual seeker and you feel drawn to certain spiritual teachers, ask yourself why you feel attracted to this person. It's probably very likely the energy, the frequency that this person is holding. So what can you do to cultivate this frequency within yourself? What can you do to bring yourself closer to this kind of frequency and this kind of emanation? How can you cultivate this energy within and build up your inner wellspring so that you don't need to look for it in another person? And on the other hand as well, if you are a spiritual teacher, you really have a responsibility. You have to be very conscious about these dynamics. You have to have very clear boundaries, a very clear communication. You have to also realize that a lot of the attention that you are getting is not there to caress your ego. These people are not actually interested or attracted to you as a person. What they are pulled towards is the divine frequency within you. So direct these people's energy of desire towards the divine and make it become a vehicle that helps them grow and helps them become independent. We all have a role to play in that. There is such a thing as context. Of course, if you're living on a tropical island, and it's very hot outside, to do a meditation in your bathing suit might make sense. To share a spiritual teaching on Instagram in your underwear, to me, doesn't make any sense. I think we all have a responsibility to take and really be very conscious about how we are using our energy, how we are using other people's energies, and become much more conscious in the energetic exchanges that we are doing amongst each other to finally be able to build healthy relationships again. And yes, desire can be a very healthy energy that even helps us grow, that helps us grow spiritually, but we have to be extremely conscious on where it is coming from and where we are directing this energy and who we choose to share our physical relationships with.